My name is Trula Cervantes, and I was 38 years old when I learned how disposable I really was. Trula, you need to leave now. Jonathan's voice wasn't raised. That was the worst part. It wasn't shouting or panic or even anger. It was flat, cold, and final, like a hotel clerk informing you checkout time had passed. He stood in the doorway of the living room, one hand braced against the wall, his body positioned just slightly sideways, blocking the hallway that led to the bedroom. My bedroom, the one I'd slept in for nearly 5 years. Behind him, half hidden in the kitchen doorway, was Peter, his 14-year-old son. His face was blotchy, his nose red, his eyes wet, but only one of them. The other was dry, sharp, watching. For just a split second before he buried his face into his hands again, I saw it. Triumph. 3 hours earlier, I had been trying. That's what I always did with Peter. Tried. We were at the mall, the three of us moving together in a loose, uncomfortable formation that was supposed to look like a family. Jonathan had insisted on it. He needs positive memories with you, he'd said that morning, buttoning his jacket. Not just rules and lectures. So I smiled. I bought overpriced smoothies. I pretended to care about neon-lit stores selling graphic shirts I didn't understand. Peter trailed behind us, hood-up phone, glued to his hand like a lifeline. When we passed the electronics store, I stopped. "Hey, Peter," I said gently. "That's the one, right? The PlayStation you've been talking about." He barely glanced up. "Yeah." "It's expensive," Jonathan said, squeezing my arm. "Maybe for his birthday, if his grades improve." I saw an opening, a bridge. "How about this?" I said. "You bring your history grade up to a B by midterms, and we'll talk about making it a birthday combo, a reward for the effort." That's when he looked at me. The contempt in his eyes was startling in its intensity. "So it's a bribe. Cool," Peter Jonathan said weakly. "That's not. It's about follow-through," I said calmly. "Effort matters." Peter snorted. "You're not my real mom." The words were old, worn thin from use, but they still landed exactly where they were meant to. I swallowed. "I'm the adult who's here," I said. "And in this house, we earn things." His jaw tightened. "You'll be sorry." I dismissed it as teenage drama. I shouldn't have. Later that evening, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes, Peter appeared in the doorway. "Mom says you should just buy it," he said. "You make enough." Something twisted in my chest. That's not how this works. "You can't tell me what to do." "No," I said evenly. "But I can say no." That's when the crash came. A violent thud upstairs, glass shattering. Jonathan's show cut off mid-sentence. Footsteps thundered. By the time I reached the hallway, Jonathan was already kneeling beside Peter, who sat on the floor clutching his arm. A picture frame shattered beside him. "She shoved me," Peter sobbed. "She lost it." Jonathan looked up at me, fury already blooming in his eyes. I hadn't touched him. I tried to speak. Jonathan didn't let me. "I knew it," he said quietly. "I knew you resented him." I was convicted in less than a minute. 10 minutes later, I was packing a bag. When I placed my keys on the entry table and stepped outside the door, closed softly behind me. That sound, the click of the latch, was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I didn't know it yet, but Peter thought he'd won. He had no idea what he'd started. I sat in my car for 10 full minutes after the door closed behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't grip the steering wheel until my knuckles went white the way movies say you're supposed to. I just sat there breathing, staring at the house through the windshield, as if it might explain itself if I waited long enough. The porch light glowed warm and familiar. A lamp in the living room cast a soft yellow square onto the curtains. From the outside, nothing had changed. It still looked like home. It just wasn't mine anymore. Eventually, I turned the key and drove. I didn't have a destination. I let instinct take over, which apparently meant a generic budget hotel near the interstate, the kind of place with buzzing fluorescent lights and a lobby that smelled faintly of old coffee and industrial cleaner. I paid for one night. One was all my brain could comprehend. The room was beige in every possible shade. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige bedspread with a suspicious stain near the corner. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared straight ahead. The unfairness didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly like cold water rising around your ankles, then your knees, then your chest. It wasn't just the lie. It was how fast Jonathan had believed it, how easily he'd accepted that I was capable of hurting his son, which meant some part of him had already believed it. I had been on probation in my own relationship and never known. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. "Jonathan, 9:47 p.m. I hope you're getting the help you need. What you did was unacceptable. Peter is terrified." I read it once, then again. Not what allegedly happened. Not we need to talk. What you did. A verdict delivered by text. I didn't reply. Another buzz an hour later. Jonathan, 10:53 p.m. We're changing the locks tomorrow. For our safety. You can arrange a time to collect the rest of your things when I'm home. I'll need to supervise. Our safety. Supervise. The words were deliberate, legal, framing me as a threat, a liability, a problem to be managed. Less than a week ago, this was the man who had fallen asleep with his head on my shoulder while we watched reruns. Now he was building a paper trail. My heart gave one sharp, painful thud and then went quiet again. I powered off my phone and set it face down. The silence returned heavier this time. Morning came with no mercy. Sunlight sliced through the cheap curtains, illuminating dust on the dresser and the reality of where I was. The grief was still there, heavy and dull, but layered on top of it was something else now, clarity. Cold, sharp, unmistakable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ending. I turned my phone back on. More messages waited. Variations on the same theme. Concern dressed up as accusation. Authority masquerading as care. I didn't open them. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I'd never imagined needing. Melissa Grant. Law school classmate. Family law. We'd kept in loose touch over the years. Holiday cards, the occasional coffee when our schedules aligned. I called. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. This wasn't a voicemail situation. I showered, dressed, and forced myself to eat something tasteless at a diner down the road. Fuel, not comfort. At 9:03 a.m., my phone rang. Trula Melissa said, "What's wrong?" I told her everything. Not emotionally, not dramatically. I laid it out the way you do when your survival depends on precision. The accusation, the immediate eviction, the texts, the locks, the supervision. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "First rule, do not go back to that house without representation. Second, she's creating a narrative. You need to create one too. Evidence. Anything." I almost laughed. "The only witness is a 14-year-old who hates me." "What about the house itself?" she asked. "Any cameras? Damage anything that contradicts the story." The words surfaced before I could stop them. "There's a security camera," I said. "By the front door. I installed it last year after packages kept getting stolen. It records audio." There was a pause, then her voice sharpened. "Do not tell him about that. Access the footage. Download everything. Back it up in multiple places. Then call me back." I went to the public library, sat in a quiet corner, opened my laptop, and logged in. My hands were steady. The timeline appeared, a series of short clips, then one longer recording, time-stamped exactly when everything fell apart. I pressed play. The video showed nothing, just the empty front walk. But the audio, my voice, calm, firm. "In this house, we earn things. The answer is no." Peter's voice low and venomous. "You'll be sorry." The crash. Loud, violent, and glass shattering. Jonathan's voice panicked. "What happened?" Peter's performance. "Perfect." She shoved me. She lost it. My own voice pleading. I didn't touch him. And then after the door closed, after I was gone, Jonathan's voice soft, relieved. "It's okay. You're safe now." Peter flat and bored. "My arm doesn't even hurt. Can I still get the PlayStation?" A sigh. Tired, almost indulgent. "We'll see. Let's get through this first." I stopped the recording. I sat there unmoving while the library hummed around me, with normal life pages turning keyboards clicking, someone coughing in the distance. My relationship hadn't been destroyed by a lie. It had been destroyed by a choice. I backed up the file. Laptop, USB, cloud folder. I labeled it carefully. Then I called Melissa back. When she finished listening, she didn't speak for a long time. That she finally said is everything. I stared out the window at the ordinary street. "I want out," I said. "Clean, fast, no contact." "Then we file," she replied. "And we don't show our hand yet." As I closed my laptop, one thought settled with absolute certainty. This was no longer about defending myself. This was about ending it. Completely. The audio lived in my head for days after I heard it. Not as a loop, nothing so dramatic, but as fragments that surfaced at odd moments like muscle memory. Peter's bored little, "Can I still get the PlayStation?" would drift up while I was brushing my teeth. Jonathan's relieved. "You're safe now," would echo when I was stopped at a red light. They didn't hurt the way I expected them to. They clarified. Grief is loud. Clarity is quiet. I moved into a small furnished apartment the following weekend. It wasn't homey. That was intentional. Gray couch, white walls, a bed frame that looked like it had been assembled and disassembled 100 times. I wanted nothing in that space to argue with me about who I was supposed to be. Melissa filed the petition on Monday. It was clean, clinical, no accusations, no drama, irreconcilable differences, a request for equitable division based on documented financial contribution, a list of personal property to be retrieved. Jonathan wasn't served immediately. That was strategic. Let him believe the story he's telling himself Melissa had said. People get sloppy when they think they've already won. She was right. The first week, Jonathan's messages stopped entirely. Silence, like he was waiting for me to crack. The second week, the tone shifted. Peter's having nightmares. This has been really hard on him. We should talk about therapy. By the third week, the authority crept back in. This can't go on forever, Trula. You need to take responsibility if you want to move forward. I deleted every message without opening it fully. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I focused on logistics, work, groceries for one, evenings that stretched quiet and uninterrupted. At first, the silence felt hollow, like walking into a room after the music stops. Then slowly it began to feel like peace. Melissa called one afternoon. "The papers are ready," she said. "He'll get a court notification soon. Not the evidence, just the filing." "When do we serve him?" She paused. "That depends. What do you want?" I knew immediately. "I want to give them to him myself." She exhaled. "I thought you might say that." "I don't want to fight," I said. "I want him to understand." "Understand what?" "That the story is over." There was a long silence on the line. "Okay," she said finally. "Then you say nothing until he has the papers in his hands. Record the interaction. And Trula, don't deviate." I didn't. The night before, I laid the envelope on my kitchen counter. Inside were the divorce papers. On the last page, beneath the signature line, a note in my handwriting. "For relevant evidence, see attached link and password." The password was the date he told me to leave. I slept better than I had in weeks. The text came the next afternoon. "Jonathan, 4:37 p.m. We need to talk. Come by tomorrow at 6. No question mark, no request, a summons." I didn't respond. At 5:58 the following evening, I stood on the front step of the house I used to call home, the manila envelope light in my hand. The porch light flicked on. The door opened. Jonathan stood there, arms crossed, wearing an old sweatshirt of mine. He looked tired, but righteous. "You're late," he said. "I'm here," I replied. He looked me over, confusion flickering across his face. I wasn't apologetic. I wasn't broken. "Come in," he said finally. Peter hovered in the kitchen doorway, pale, watchful. The house smelled different now, staler, like no one had bothered to open a window in weeks. Jonathan cleared his throat. "I hope you've had time to think." I didn't answer. He took my silence as permission. "Peter has been very generous," he continued. "He's willing to move forward if you take full accountability. Therapy. A sincere apology. Then maybe we can talk about you coming back." I held out the envelope. "I brought you something." His brow furrowed. "What is that?" "You should open it." He did. The color drained from his face as he read the first page. "What is this?" he whispered. "It's the conversation you said we'd have later," I said calmly. "This handles everything." His hands started to shake. "No," he said, "you don't get to do this." "Turn to the last page." He did. He saw the link, the password. "What is this?" he demanded. "The recording," I said. "From the security camera. It has audio." Peter made a sound small and sharp. Jonathan's eyes snapped to the window, then back to me. "It recorded everything," I continued, "including what you said after I left." The room felt suddenly very small. Peter shook his head wildly. "Dad, she's lying." But Jonathan wasn't looking at him anymore. For the first time since the accusation, he looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. "You recorded us," he said. "I protected my property," I replied. "It just happened to protect me too." His anger collapsed into panic. "Trula, wait. He's just a kid." "He knew you'd believe him," I said quietly. "And you did." The silence stretched. "What did you do?" he demanded. Peter started crying, real crying this time. I picked up the papers, set them neatly on the table. "You'll be formally served," I said. "My things will be collected Friday. Please don't be here." I walked out as their voices rose behind me, the sound of something breaking, not glass this time, but trust. When I closed the door, I didn't hesitate. I drove away. The silence after that night was different. It wasn't shock anymore. It wasn't grief. It was intentional. I didn't block Jonathan's number. I didn't need to. I let his messages arrive and sit unread, little sealed envelopes of panic and regret stacking up on my screen. Silence, I learned, is not absence. It's a presence. It fills space. It forces people to confront themselves. The first message came the morning after. "Jonathan, 7:12 a.m. We need to talk about what happened last night." The second came an hour later. That recording doesn't change the fact that Peter was scared. By the afternoon, the tone shifted. "You blindsided me. This could have been handled privately. Privately. As if exile lock changes and supervision had been private kindnesses. I deleted them all without responding. Friday came with military precision. The movers arrived at 10 sharp, two men in matching shirts, polite and efficient. Jonathan wasn't there. Peter wasn't there. The house felt hollow, like a stage set after the actors have gone home. They packed my books, my clothes, the furniture I'd owned long before Jonathan ever entered my life. I watched from the doorway, detached. Nothing in those boxes felt like a loss. They were just objects that had been trapped inside a lie. That afternoon, Melissa called. "He's retaining counsel," she said. "Not a great one." I smiled for the first time in weeks. The legal process moved quickly after that. Once the audio evidence was disclosed, Jonathan's claims evaporated. The narrative he'd so confidently constructed collapsed under its own weight. There were no more allegations, no more moral posturing, just negotiations. Money, equity, timelines. The house, his house, he'd called it, had to be refinanced to buy me out. I learned through mutual acquaintances that the payment shocked him, that he hadn't realized how much I'd covered. Funny how clarity comes with invoices. People tried to pull me back into the story. A former friend texted, "He's really struggling." Another wrote, "Peter feels terrible." I didn't respond. Their discomfort wasn't my responsibility. 3 months after the papers were signed, I ran into them by accident. A hardware store, paint aisle. Jonathan looked older, not in years, but in posture, shoulders slumped, eyes dull. Peter had grown taller, all limbs and resentment headphones on, ignoring his father's whispered instructions. They saw me at the same time. Jonathan froze. Hope flickered across his face, then shame, then something like longing. Peter's bravado melted into pure fear. I held their gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then I turned my cart and walked away. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. And that I realized was the victory. The silence didn't last forever. It never does. 3 weeks after the movers cleared my things and the house officially stopped being mine, Jonathan broke it, not with apology, not with accountability, but with authority. "Jonathan, 4:37 p.m. We need to talk. Come by the house tomorrow at 6. No please, no question mark." It was the same tone he'd used the night he told me to leave, the same assumption that he still held the power to dictate terms, time, and outcome. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I set my phone face down and went back to chopping vegetables for dinner. That was the thing he still didn't understand. Silence hadn't been me waiting. Silence had been me finishing. I didn't reply. The next day I dressed carefully. Not defensively, not provocatively, just deliberately. Clean lines, neutral colors, the kind of outfit that didn't ask for approval or forgiveness. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen counter, where I'd left it light and unassuming, holding the end of a 5-year illusion. I arrived at 5:58. The porch light was already on. The lawn was overgrown. A trash bag sagged near the curb, missed by collection. Small signs of entropy details I would have noticed before worried over fixed. I didn't ring the bell. I waited. At 6:02, the door opened. Jonathan stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, wearing confidence like armor that no longer fit. He looked me up and down, clearly searching for something. Hesitation, guilt, regret. He found none. "You're late," he said. "I'm here," I replied calmly. "You wanted to talk." That pause, the fraction of a second where his script stuttered, was almost imperceptible. But I felt it. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The house smelled stale, lived in the wrong way. Peter lingered in the kitchen doorway, pretending not to watch, pretending not to listen. His eyes flicked toward me and then away. Jonathan took a breath, gathering his practiced righteousness. "I hope these weeks have given you time to reflect," he began, "to understand how serious what happened was." I said nothing. He mistook my silence for submission. "Peter has been through trauma," he continued, "but he's resilient, forgiving. If you're willing to take full accountability, apologize sincerely, and commit to family therapy, then maybe we can talk about moving forward." Moving forward. Back into the place I'd been expelled from without a hearing. Back into a role that required me to confess to a lie to earn conditional belonging. "That's what you want?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he said, relief creeping into his voice. "It's the only way." I reached into my bag and held out the envelope. "I brought you something." His expression hardened. "What is that?" In a manner of speaking, I said, "It's accountability." He took it suspicious now and opened it. The moment his eyes landed on the words "petition for dissolution of marriage," his face drained of color. "What is this?" he whispered. "It's what you said we'd discuss later," I replied. "This just makes it official." His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, disbelief cracking through his certainty. "You can't do this," he said hoarsely. "After everything." "Turn to the last page," I instructed. He did. He saw the note, the link, the password. "What is this?" he demanded, though fear had already answered for him. "The recording," I said, "from the security camera." Peter made a small choking sound behind him. Jonathan's eyes darted to the window, then back to me, the reality crashing in too fast for denial. "It recorded everything," I continued evenly, "including what you said after I left." Peter shook his head frantically. "Dad, she's lying. She's bluffing." But Jonathan wasn't listening. For the first time since that night, he was truly looking at me. Not as the villain in his story, not as the woman who needed correction, but as someone he had catastrophically misjudged. "You recorded us," he breathed. "I protected my property," I corrected. "It just happened to protect me too." His composure fractured. Panic flooded in raw and unfiltered. "Trula, please," he said, stepping toward me. "He's just a kid. We can fix this." "He knew you'd believe him," I replied softly. "And you did." That was when the illusion finally collapsed. Jonathan turned to Peter, fury and fear colliding. "What did you do?" Peter started crying, real crying this time, messy and unguarded. I bent down, picked up the divorce papers he'd dropped, straightened them, and placed them neatly on the table. "You'll be formally served," I said. "My things will be collected Friday. Please don't be here." As their voices rose behind me, accusation, panic, blame, I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. The door closed behind me with a solid final sound. Not the soft click of exile this time, but a full, deliberate thud. A period at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. I didn't sit in the car afterward. I didn't need to. There was no shock left to process, no breath to catch. I started the engine immediately and pulled away from the curb, my headlights sweeping once across the living room window. For a brief second, I saw them frozen inside, Jonathan standing rigid, papers in his hands. Peter small and hunched near the kitchen counter, the architecture of their alliance collapsing in real time. Then I turned the wheel and drove. The movers came that Friday morning. 10 o'clock exactly as scheduled. 2 men, polite, efficient, neutral professionals, whose only job was to separate objects from space. Jonathan was there this time. He stood in the kitchen, red-eyed and silent, watching as boxes were taped and labeled. Peter wasn't. I was told later he'd asked to stay at a friend's. I suspected it wasn't a request, so much as an escape. No one spoke to me. No one needed to. When the truck doors closed, something loosened in my chest. Not relief, not joy, release. The legal aftermath was mercifully short. Once Melissa disclosed the audio to Jonathan's attorney, the tone of the negotiations shifted overnight. There were no more allegations, no moral speeches, no posturing. The claim of violence evaporated as if it had never existed. The case became what it always should have been, numbers on a page, obligations measured in dollars instead of emotion. I received a buyout for my share of the house. Jonathan refinanced to keep it. I heard through the same thin grapevine that had once carried whispers about me that the payments were a shock, that he hadn't realized how much I'd covered, how much my presence had buffered his life. Funny how absence clarifies contribution. Friends tried to reinsert themselves into the narrative. "He's really struggling. Peter feels awful. You know he didn't mean for it to go this far." None of them asked how I was. I didn't respond. Their discomfort wasn't my responsibility. Their need for a softer ending didn't outweigh my need for a true one. Months passed. My life took on a new rhythm, quieter, cleaner, unnegotiated. I bought groceries for one. I watched what I wanted. I slept without bracing for conflict. The energy I'd once spent calibrating my tone, my expectations, my patience returned to me like reclaimed territory. About 6 months later, I saw them again. It was accidental. A hardware store, paint aisle. Jonathan looked older, not just tired, but diminished, like someone who had spent too long arguing with reality and lost. He held paint samples in one hand, indecision etched into his posture. Peter was taller now, headphones on eyes, distant, already practicing the art of disengagement. We locked eyes at the same moment. Jonathan froze. A flicker of something hope maybe passed over his face before collapsing into shame. Peter's bravado vanished entirely. He looked like a boy who had finally learned that lies have a shelf life. I held their gaze for 2 seconds. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply looked through them, the way you look through a shelf you've already decided not to buy. Then I turned my cart and walked away. No triumph surged through me. No vindication. Just a quiet certainty. The divorce was finalized shortly after. A thin envelope arrived in the mail. I signed where indicated, filed it away, and felt nothing at all. Sometimes late at night, I think about how small the trigger was, a petty lie from a resentful teenager, a man's refusal to question the story that protected his comfort, a single corrupted line of code crashing an entire system. The betrayal burned everything down. But when the smoke cleared, I wasn't standing in ruins. I was standing in space. Freedom didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly in pieces so small I almost missed them at first. The first was waking up on a Saturday with nowhere I was expected to be. No tense breakfast negotiations. No bracing myself for Peter's mood. No calculating whether a reasonable boundary would be interpreted as cruelty. I lay in bed longer than necessary, listening to the hum of the city outside my window, and realized my body wasn't tight. I wasn't already exhausted before the day had begun. The second was money, not abundance, not indulgence, just clarity. My accounts were mine. My expenses were predictable. I no longer felt the low-grade panic of subsidizing someone else's life while being treated as expendable within it. When the buyout from the house landed in my account, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced, as if a long skewed scale had finally leveled. People kept trying to give me a narrative I didn't want. They wanted me angry, vindictive, publicly wounded. They wanted a version of me that made sense of what had happened in neat moral terms, good versus bad, victim versus villain. They wanted spectacle. I gave them nothing. I stopped explaining. I stopped clarifying. I stopped defending. Silence, once a survival strategy, became a boundary. I traveled alone for the first time in years. I chose destinations without compromised schedules, without negotiation. I took a woodworking class on a whim. I learned how to build shelves, literal ones, measuring twice, cutting once, trusting my own hands. There was something deeply satisfying about creating structures that held weight without collapsing. I didn't date right away. I didn't need to replace anything. I was too busy inhabiting the space where Jonathan and Peter had once been, the space I'd been shrinking myself to fit inside their story. One evening, as I was assembling a bookshelf in my apartment, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked older than I had 5 years ago, yes, but steadier, less apologetic, like someone who had stopped asking permission to exist. That was when I understood something important. The betrayal hadn't taken my family from me. It had given me my life back. Stop. Part 8, the quiet ending. The last time I thought about them was unintentional. I was filing paperwork, sorting through old folders. I'd never bothered to organize documents from a life that no longer required explanation. Near the bottom of a box, I found a faded photo from years ago, the three of us at a beach. Jonathan's arm around my shoulders, Peter squinting into the sun, already impatient to be somewhere else. I studied it for a moment. Not with longing, not with bitterness, with curiosity. How strange I thought that I once believed this was stability, that I once believed love meant endurance, that I once mistook tolerance for belonging. I put the photo back in the box and closed the lid. That chapter didn't need revisiting. Freedom, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with revenge or redemption arcs. It doesn't require the other side to understand what they lost. Freedom is waking up without dread, speaking without fear, living without walking on emotional eggshells you didn't scatter. Jonathan thought he was teaching me a lesson about accountability. Peter thought he was punishing me for saying no. Instead, they taught me something far more valuable. That love without trust is a contract designed to fail. That authority without integrity collapses under truth. And that my worth was never something they had the power to grant or revoke. The betrayal burned everything down. But what rose in its place wasn't anger. It was peace. And in that quiet, unbroken peace,